Hey everyone. So I want to show you something I saw on X. It's two clips, both of Tucker Carlson, and they were released 8 days apart. And then I want to slow down and show you exactly what's happening in them. I want to unpack what Tucker's doing. I think it tells you more about how conspiracy theories actually spread, why they work. And I think it tells you that better than most things I've ever seen on the subject. And of course, it's one of our favorite conspiracy theories. It's the conspiracy theory about Israel being involved in the murder of Charlie Kirk. And now, a few days ago, the first clip you're going to see is from just a couple days ago. Alex Bruzewitz sat down with Tucker Carlson and asked him point blank about something Tucker had reportedly said that was released 8 days earlier, that Israel was responsible for killing Charlie Kirk, and Tucker denies it flat out. He says, "I did not say that." Now, in the clip from 8 days earlier, which you're going to see at the end after the Alex Bruzewitz clip, that is from the Can't Be Censored podcast, where Tucker says something that sounds a whole lot like Israel was involved in Charlie's murder. So we're going to watch them both, and then we're going to go through it and I'll share my thoughts. Okay, so let's pull this up on screen. Here we go. And let's go.
By the way, I did see something that you were on a podcast yesterday. You said you think Israel killed Charlie Kirk.
I did not say that.
I
did not say that.
Okay, what was the clip then?
I said, I've never said that.
Okay.
I know a lot of people, including in the Trump administration, who think that. However, there's no proof of that.
Yeah.
What I said was two things. One, I don't know when the command came down and from whom that we have to trust everything federal law enforcement says, but I'm not obeying that. We have a moral obligation to push federal law enforcement to do the job we pay them to do, which is to investigate the crimes fully. And so, for example, if there are people who predicted Charlie's death on Twitter, I think the rest of us can expect that they've been hauled in by the FBI for questioning, and I don't think they have been.
So, I don't know about that, but okay. I do know what what you're talking about, the Discord chats.
No, I'm specifically talking
TikTok.
I'm talking about the Twitter posts that seem to predict Charlie's death. Maybe that
I don't know if that's been investigated. I would love for that to be.
So that's number one. Number two, just because someone is shot by one person doesn't mean others weren't involved. And don't berate me into accepting that assumption, because I would never accept that. Why would I assume that? And three, to tell me that you know the motive before the trial even starts, that he was killed for his views on transgenderism, maybe he was. Maybe it was more complicated than that. How would you know? You don't know. So stop yelling at me to accept a conclusion that you can't prove.
I hear you.
Why would you do that? This is my friend. And by the way, if I was murdered, I would expect people who loved me not to jump to unwarranted conclusions, but to press federal law enforcement to do its freaking job.
Yeah.
And stop calling people names because they're asking you to do your job.
I think a lot of people did jump to unwarranted conclusions.
Maybe. I don't know if they're warranted or not.
And, right after the assassination, many people were with big platforms, not you, were saying that Israel was behind it.
Many people with big platforms were saying that he was killed for his views on transgenderism. And we don't know that, actually. We don't know anything.
But Charlie was killed as he was talking about transgender. And this guy, Tyler Robinson, seems to be in love with transgender people.
That may be absolutely true.
For me, and I think a lot of Americans, that seems like the most plausible situation.
Charlie Kirk was murdered.
Yeah.
And he was not murdered for his opinions on transgenderism, obviously. He was, I believe, and most people who knew him well, as I did, and was friends with him as I was, believe he was most likely murdered for his evolving views on Israel.
Did you catch what happened there? Sorry, my mic was muted for a sec. In the earlier clip, in the clip that was recorded earlier, the clip you saw last, the older clip, he says, and I'm reading it back exactly, "I believe, and most people who knew him well, as I did, believe he was most likely murdered for his evolving views on Israel." And then a week later, we have Bruzewitz asking him directly, "Did you say Israel killed Charlie Kirk?" And he said, "I did not say that." Now, technically, he's right. He never used those 4 words in that order. But watch what the sentence is actually built to do. "I believe, and most people who knew him well believe." So he says it as a belief. It's not a claim, which means you can't really check it. You can't really be wrong. It's what he believes. You can't argue with that. And it borrows the weight of a whole group of unnamed people, right? The people who knew Charlie, most of the people who knew Charlie best, right? So now it's not just Tucker's opinion anymore. It's like there's a consensus, a quiet, on the down low consensus inside Charlie's inner circle, except no one can verify it because there's no names here. No one can verify that they said any such thing. So you put these things together, you get this accusation that gets planted in millions of minds by Tucker, and he never has to technically defend it because technically he never made the claim. So when it comes back to bite him, his off-ramp, his deniability is built in. He just says, well, it's just something, I never said that Israel killed him. I never made such an accusation. But let's actually test the claim itself. Not just the mechanics of how he made it. Like most people who knew him well, who specifically knew Charlie Kirk better than Tucker Carlson did. So there were a lot of people who knew him very well, I should say up front. And this isn't secondhand for me. I know a number of the people who were closest to Charlie, not from reading about them, but these were people that I knew. In the months before and after Charlie was killed, I had a lot of interactions with many people who were very close to Charlie. So when I tell you what they've said, I'm not relaying a headline. I'm talking to you about conversations I had with people. I was part of, and specifically when you're talking about Charlie's views on Israel. And yeah, Charlie's views were evolving on Israel. His views on everything were evolving. And, he had his questions and his criticisms for Israel. We'll get to that in a bit. But let's just talk about whether the people closest to Charlie are in consensus that Israel had something to do with it, or it was because of his evolving views on Israel that he was killed. That's what Tucker says. So you have Andrew Colvett, who's his co-host and producer, who was with him daily for years. You have Blake Neff, who was also one of the producers, and he worked with Charlie very closely. He worked out a lot of Charlie's arguments with him on many issues. You have Rob McCoy, Charlie's pastor, who traveled with Charlie, was one of the closest people to him. You have Erica, his wife. Now, none of them is vague on this issue. None of them has said that they buy this. In fact, every single one of the people I just mentioned are on the record repeatedly saying that they do not believe this Israel angle. They don't say I'm not sure, or I'd rather not speculate. They just reject it. Okay, so this isn't a case where what Tucker's saying is like just unverifiable and I'm skeptical of it. The actual people he's citing, most people who knew him well, and now of course he's appealing to authority. He's saying, well, it's all on the down low and you'll never get them to admit it. And it's most people who knew him well. But most people who knew him well have gone on record saying the opposite of what he claims they believe. So there's no basis to trust what Tucker is saying here. And I want to point something else out here. The move that Tucker's making to state a suspicion as a personal belief and attribute it to this vague, unnamed community of insiders who are insiders, right? They have authority. And then technically you leave the claim deniable because you just say that it's kind of like a hunch or a belief or a suspicion. That's how Joe Kent, remember Joe Kent, that's how he operated when he resigned from his position and then went on Tucker Carlson's show, where he didn't say Israel was involved. He said, there's linkage for us to investigate. And then he pointed at the private group chat that I was in with Charlie, as if that settled something, because Charlie was upset about some pro-Israel donors who were abandoning him. And then, of course, Joe Kent resigned from his position shortly after the New York Times reported that he'd been digging through FBI files looking for foreign involvement in Charlie's death. And the FBI director was having none of it because there was nothing, he thought it was nonsense. So when Joe Kent goes on Tucker's podcast, or Tucker in this clip, when you raise a question, it makes it sound like you're giving plausibility to a certain accusation, but you don't have the burden of any evidence whatsoever because you're just asking a question. And then you have this built-in deniability because you were just asking a question, you weren't raising an accusation, but it does the work of an accusation. See, that's how this is part of the. I'm trying to unpack here is like the mechanics of conspiracy theory psychology here. So, like, let me put it this way: why does this work? Why does this sound convincing? Because when you say, "I don't buy the official story," I think it's really about Israel. The way it feels, and this is like the culture of the conspiracy theory world. It's the psychology of it, right? The way it feels is it's like you're seeing something that other people aren't seeing. It's like you get this kind of pleasure, this rush of being, you're one of the sharp ones. You're one of the people who's not getting fooled. And you can, and you support that by saying things like, I knew him well, I was his friend. And knowing him well and being his friend has nothing to do with understanding the circumstances of his assassination. So I knew him well, I was his friend. It sounds like a credential, right? It's not evidence of anything. It just tells you I had access you didn't have. And that's the bait to make the conspiracy theory work. Not the theory itself, but you feel like you're getting insider information from an authority. You're being led in to something that no one else was, that no one else knows, no one else realizes because they didn't know Charlie as well. And there's no cost to Tucker being wrong because he never claimed anything. He just stated his belief. Right? Like when Tucker says to Bruesewitz, I would never accept that assumption. And he was talking about those people who say who believe that Tyler Robinson acted alone out of his own motives. Right? Tyler Robinson, we have text messages from him to his trans lover talking about Charlie Kirk. He said things about wanting to kill him. Right, but when Tucker says, I would never accept that assumption. Okay, fine. It's good to be a skeptic that you never accept assumptions, even though there's a lot to go on to make that assumption work. But when Tucker says to Bruesewitz, I would never accept that assumption about people concluding that Tyler Robinson acted alone. Remember, he's saying that he would never accept what is the most plausible explanation on the table. Because Charlie was shot while talking about transgenderism by someone connected to that community who had expressed that motive and expressed that hatred for Charlie over that issue. You don't need a hidden hand from a foreign country for that story to make sense. And Tucker views the straightforwardness of that as a reason for suspicion. And he says, I'm not going to just embrace that assumption. What was it, right? I'll never accept that assumption. I'm not going to jump to conclusions. I'm not going to close off other possibilities. Okay, so you're a skeptic. But then when you get to the less plausible explanation that Charlie was killed over his views of Israel, right, by people who would have to see him as a threat, coordinate an operation, and execute it without leaving a trace while framing up this pro-trans kid, right? That theory that has no evidence to back it up, Tucker doesn't say, I would never accept that assumption. I would never, right? I would never just accept that assumption. He doesn't say it about that theory. About that one, he just says that he believes it. He just states it, right? And he backs it up by saying that this unnamed group of people who are very close to Charlie agree. See, that's the asymmetry I'm pointing out here. I hope you get my point. And it's the whole game he's playing. The simple, plausible story, Tyler Robinson assassinated Charlie Kirk, gets treated as unproven and premature. Oh, we don't have evidence for that. We don't know for sure that it was over transgenderism, right? So the most plausible story, and the one that the evidence is pointing to, gets treated as unproven, right? As jumping to conclusions. But the very complicated, far less plausible story gets treated as something that he's comfortable asserting outright, that he believes. There, he's not being careful about needing evidence, right? He's being careful about which conclusion he's willing to embrace. And he's choosing the harder one, the less plausible one, not the easier to believe one. Does this make sense? Look, I've said this before. The absurdity of this is as follows. Let's take the theory seriously. Let's grant the premise. Let's say Israel wanted to get rid of Charlie Kirk. Israel did it. Okay, now, I know the obvious comeback to what I'm about to do. I'm about to ask whether this worked, right? And someone watching is already thinking, so what if it backfired? Intelligence services miscalculate all the time, right? A failed operation is not proof that there was no operation. But hear me out. That's a fair point. But there's a difference between an operation that produces an unintended side effect and an intelligence operation that requires you to believe that Israel looked directly at one of its most valuable assets in American conservative media and culture and politics and decided that they had to get rid of him. Okay, it was, let me drill down on this a little further. Were Charlie's views on Israel evolving? Yes. Did he have criticisms of Israel? Yes. Were there some anti-Israel positions he held? Yes, absolutely. And I've been very clear about that. This claim, this is another straw man, the claim by Candace and others that like the pro-Israel side, is denying that Charlie had criticisms for Israel. Of course he had criticisms for Israel, but let's look at some facts. The final guest, I believe, he was definitely on the show the day before Charlie was killed. The last show Charlie did, he was on. The final guest, I believe, on Charlie's show ever was Ben Shapiro. Now, we didn't know it was going to be final. I'm just saying that if we want to get to proximity of Charlie's murder and where he stood on Israel, he had Ben Shapiro on, very pro-Israel segment. When all of media, left and right, was embracing the narrative that Israel was starving the population in Gaza, Charlie went against the grain and took a lot of heat for doing a whole segment and then tweeting out that segment, sharing it on X, whatever it's called. I don't know what the verb is for an X post. Tweeting out the segment where he had me on, and we went through the argument that it is a hoax and that the people of Gaza were being provided with enough food, that there was no starvation in Gaza. And he got lambasted by the entire anti-Israel crowd. He went against the grain on that and defended Israel. Not to defend Israel, but because as he opened that segment that day that he said, I don't like being lied to. And he embraced the position that the Gaza starvation was a hoax, a very pro-Israel position. And also around in the summer just in the months before he was killed, there was a massacre of Druze going on in Syria that was not being covered by American mainstream media, especially because President Trump was kind of embracing the president of Syria, al-Julani at the time, and no one was really willing to cover the massacre of Druze, the Druze who wanted Israel to step in and help them. And it was only the Charlie Kirk show that had on an Israeli Druze spokesman to talk about the Druze community, a very pro-Israel segment. I mean, these are just a few segments that Charlie did not need to do if he was not willing to have pro-Israel pushback against anti-Israel narratives that were prevailing in the media. He wouldn't have had these people on. And this is all I'm talking about in the last month or two before he was killed. What's my point? My point is that, yes, Charlie, his views on Israel were evolving. His views on a lot of things were evolving. But he was still, from the perspective, here's my point. From the perspective of the Israeli people, of people who care about Israel's image, of the Israeli government, if you will, and the concern about what was happening on the American right, and where are the platforms where we can get a pro-Israel message, where we can push back on the lies about Israel, where do we have access where we can actually state our case? One of the most positive, if not the most positive people and context was Charlie Kirk and the Charlie Kirk show, allowing the pro-Israel narratives to be stated. He shared different narratives, but it was very important access. Why on earth would the state of Israel want to get rid of its greatest asset in the America First movement, which was access to Charlie Kirk and his audience? That was actually working. Charlie was pushing back against anti-Israel narratives all the time. right? In other words, what do you believe? You believe that Israel wanted to get rid of Charlie because they thought it was irredeemable, but like meanwhile he's still having pro-Israel guests on all the way down to the end, like he was having them on all the time, and they wanted to kill him. Understand, he was one of the most effective pro-Israel voices in the American right. On his college tours, according to his people, this was told to me by the people very close to him. This was what our relationship was about, talking about Israel. So I mean, he shared this, that close to half the questions he fielded were about Israel, and he defended Israel. The whole point of the private WhatsApp group that I was in was for him to talk through Israel issues with a group of pro-Israel people who knew the issues. That was it. And Charlie put that group together. Again, so why would Charlie be doing that? Or let's say even if he was turning on Israel, he was struggling with it, there was still access to Charlie Kirk and an ability to state our case on his platform that was a massive asset to Israel. And you're saying that Israel wanted to get rid of that? So it just doesn't make any sense. Look, he was an asset to Israel. So again, you have to believe that if Israel killed him, Israel wanted to gain something from that. So what did Israel get from killing Charlie Kirk if they did it, right? It got Candace Owens with months of rocket fuel for her anti-Israel content and her conspiracy theories. It got Tucker Carlson, who, here we have him denying on camera that he said Israel had anything to do with it, where 8 days earlier he says that it was because of Israel. So Tucker Carlson is handed this explosive conspiracy theory also. And then you got Joe Kent, the former head of national counterterrorism, with his legitimacy of having served in the administration, legitimizing the theory to one of the largest audiences in conservative media. So we have this conspiracy theory about Israel assassinating Charlie Kirk, injected into the bloodstream of the America First movement that is wavering on Israel as a movement. Walk through the results of this operation by Israel if they did it. Right? So you have to believe that Israel are geniuses who were supposedly capable of this very, very carefully done political assassination to make it look like he was killed by a trans activist, and to get rid of their most valuable advocate that speaks to the next generation of American conservatives. And they decided that the rational move was to kill him, and it ended up creating this whole poison, this anti-Israel narrative that went viral in the America First movement and has made more anti-Israel sentiment in that movement than ever before. That was the result of them doing this. So you're saying that, so this, I mean, are they bumbling idiots, the Israeli intelligence? This is not this is like the dumbest plan of all time. So are the Israelis geniuses or are they fools? Look, the simpler explanation is the one that doesn't require Israel to shoot itself in the foot, that a pro-trans kid who hated Charlie's politics shot him. And everything since has been people building a story about Israel because that story kind of is much more interesting than the actual simplest explanation. Look, if Israel acted and in the process of acting handed their enemies their best weapon in years, that's not just a fail. It's the most basic failure there could possibly be. It's absurd. Look, listen, let's go back to where we started. You have Tucker saying when Alex Bruce asks him, did you say that Israel killed Charlie Kirk? He said, I did not say that. And then you hold it up against everything else he said 8 days earlier with no one pushing back, saying, of course, it's obvious. He says it's obvious that he wasn't killed for his views on on transgenderism, that it's, that everyone, all the people around him said that he was killed about what he said about Israel. This is Tucker. This is how a conspiracy theory spreads. Anyway, I don't know how much longer we're going to be talking about this one, but he keeps bringing it up, and I keep feeling the need to push back. I feel like it's my responsibility, having been in the position that I was in this story. So I'm sorry if you have fatigue from this story, but it's important to identify the devices that Tucker and his ilk use when they're spreading these things. That's what I was hoping to accomplish here. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff.